supporting Thank you. Supporting critical business projects and conducting risk assessments and audits, leading data incident management processes, and serving as a subject matter expert for stakeholders and third parties. As well, he's a vibrant speaker, trainer, and presenter who holds a master's in computer network security and an LLM intellectual property and data protection law. As well, he has several prestigious certifications, including the CRISC, CBPSE, CSM, ISO 27001 lead implementer, and ISO 27701, as well as the CIPPE and CIPM and CIPT. He also has a commitment to staying at the forefront of technological advancements, and that's evident in his certifications with IAPP, with the AIGP, which is the Artificial Intelligence Governance certification, as well as the ISO 2001 Artificial Intelligence from PECB. So he's also the CEO and principal trainer of Data Protection Academy, and is dedicated to equipping organizations and individuals with the knowledge and tools to navigate the complexities of data protection and privacy in today's digital landscape. Today, he will be taking us through cybersecurity essentials for data protection. Without further ado, Mr. Hari, please take the floor. We're happy to have you. You're muted.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Abigail, for that lovely introduction. It's a pleasure of being here, and let me share my screen. Basically, hold on. Do I have? Yeah. So I think you can give me the option of sharing my screen. So, like I was saying, thank you very much. I've been in one of this Privacy Hub program in the past. I think it's a good initiative to educate everybody, especially we Africans, in regard to our privacy rights and information security. Okay, yeah, I've got it now. Okay, yeah, you got it. So in regard to this topic, cybersecurity essentials for data protection, it's I would say it's one of a massive area to touch on, but with the time that I've got, I will just try to I've tried to limit it to just the basis of the intersection between data protection and information security or cybersecurity. Like I said here, we're going to explore the vital strategy and practices necessary to safeguard sensitive data. Okay. So this is the proposed agenda. We'll look at basic security essentials. We'll understand the role of individuals in data protection and information security. What are the significance of user awareness when it comes to putting security measures in place? And then we'll try to examine the impact of cybersecurity on data protection compliances effort. And then the key principles for effective collaborations. We'll look at that. We'll touch on importance of training people because, like you know, people are the most important people when it comes to privacy and information security. We'll touch about it when we look at data breaches. Human error is the most common data breach you will get there, and then assess the social implications of cybersecurity and data protection effort. So basically, how do we understand the cybersecurity essential? It's a core principle of cybersecurity and their importance. So we're looking at risk. We're looking at the confidentiality, the integrity, availability, some cases risk management, and or security policy. These are essentials in information security, but also these link together when it comes to data protection, because confidentiality basically ensures that sensitive data is accessible solely by authorized user. Hope you can see my screen. I guess didn't ask for that.
Yes, very clear.
Okay, good. So the integrity, when we talk about integrity, we are referring to you protecting data from unauthorized access. It could be alteration. It could be trying to maintain the accuracy of that data. Because once that data is touched one way or the other, it renders that information, I would say, I want permit me to use that word, useless in terms of the information that is trying to portray. Okay, and then the availability, basically you are guaranteeing information is accessible whenever required, because again, if your information is not available to your customers or to your users, it could be classified as a data breach if you want to go deep down into data breaches. And then when we look at risk management, management in information security is key. So there are some areas in information that specifically deals on risk management. It could be on the part of your vendors, and then it could be internally, you manage your risk internally. Basically, you are trying to identify and prioritize risk, basically to minimize potential threat. So in terms of you, when you manage those, when you do those risk management, you are putting measures in place to safeguard those data. Yes, there's no 100% security in MFA, but at least we have that. You should be confident enough to say, okay, we are protecting our data, say 99%, but that 1%, like the threat actors, the bad guys, if I will use that word, just need one chance to get into your system. But you as an organization, you continually protect your data, you continually evolve using different types of measures to protect your data. And then we can look at information policy. Your policy basically will form a document aligning how you as an organization will protect your data. Okay. In some security policies, they will say, okay, we will use data loss prevention. If money is not the issue, we'll use data loss prevention. We'll use intrusion detection system, which is the DPS. We use your IPS intrusion prevention system to prevent those data. But what you are trying to do, you are trying to ring fence your data that you have, because data is the most important thing we are trying to protect. Great. This is where your cybersecurity and information security intersect when it comes to information handling. As again, when we understand the cybersecurity threat to data security, we're going to explore the main threat to data security. One, we have your malware, which is malicious software intended to harm or exploit exploit devices. It could include viruses and things like your worms, what they'll call your worms in terms of virus. Ransomware is another area which is the most popular things you will get here. Organization will already get ransomware installed in a system so that they force them to pay money when they cannot retrieve their data back. It's a type of malware that basically encrypt the file, demanding payment for the encryption of that key. Again, I talked about human error. Another area is insider threat. Insider threat comes from individual within an organization, whether intentional or unintentional. We have them. You can have disgruntled employee that will be in organization that might reveal other informations to other threat actors. He might use it for their own purposes because they've known this organization and know the weak area of the organizations and might use it against them. Phishing email is one of the ones that very, very common now. It's a fraudulent attempt to acquire sensitive information by pretending to be a trustworthy source. Again, in your organizations, you will see at times you do your phishing simulation where they will try to test you to see if you actually can identify a phishing email. Some phishing emails these days are very clever, especially with the use of AI these days. It's very clever. You have to have a trained eye to be able to identify if that is a phishing email. Hence, in organization, you will have phishing email training. You have this simulation on a regular basis. It's not to say yes, you are 100% satisfied in terms of your tools that you will use to prevent that. There are a lot of tools out there that you can use to prevent that. But it's another common area in cybersecurity where the threat actors will try to come in. We have what we call the DDoS attack. Basically, it's a distributed denial of service. Basically, it's a way of overwhelming the system with excessive traffic requests, basically just to disrupt the main service. So imagine these scrupulous guys, actors, seizing computers from different areas and requesting the service to your services that you're providing. Let's say it could be your website. It would run down your website because your website would not be able to handle those requests that they come in. So basically, that's what they call it, the denial of service attack. So the right people that are supposed to access the website to go and look for something for themselves will not be able to access it because they've flooded it with requests and they've drawn that that system down. Okay, so what are the best practices for data protection when it comes to when we want to link data protection and information security together? Basically, we need to implement essential practices for cybersecurity. Basically, regularly updating your software. You keep the software and system up to date, basically to protect that vulnerability. Because you also need to conduct vulnerability assessment of your environment so that you can know the area that is vulnerable. You must do penetration testing as well. They both come hand in hand, where it will tell you where is vulnerable. And then we might look at strong password policies. Organizations will implement strong word policies in place. And basically, some organization will force you to change your password every 3 months, or it depends on the organization, or every 180 days, 6 months, basically. And they will force you not to use the same password again. So if you are changing it to the same password, I will tell you that no, you've used this password in the past. So you need to create a password. You need to create a certain password from the organization, what the organization has set in their information security policy. We look at access control, ensuring that sensitive data is only accessible to unauthorized persons. Imagine you work in an organization and the IT team mistakenly grant you access to your HR team, okay? And you can your HR folder, and you can see what HR do. You can see everybody's data. You can see what salary your coworker is earning. Imagine that coming out to say, yes, I can access that, and they're telling you what they found. It's a serious breach. Even if you are in the organization, inside that HR department. I worked for an organization where I was granted access. I was a DPO, but I was granted because data protection at that time was sitting in the HR team, and the HR director was the sponsor of that project. But when they were granting me access to the data protection folder, the IT team just gave me access to all HR folder. So imagine if I didn't know exactly what to do as a data protection officer, I would have been able to access everybody's information, their personal record, their sensitive data, their health record, their salaries. So I had to tell the HR director to say, well, I've been wrongly granted access to some of these folders because the moment, I mean, it's just, how did I know about it? It's just me doing a test. When I got the folder, I can see the all HR folder. And I'm wondering, why am I seeing those folders? I'm not supposed to. So clicking on the first folder, I saw that I had access. So I had to report to the team for them to rectify that. When we look at backups as well, regular backup of your data to recover from maybe some data loss, some ransomware, or so. But I mean, just that your backup alone would not easily restore that. It will take some effort to restore that backup back. And the danger of the backup when it comes to data protection is as well, do you regularly go to your backup? Because if you go there to go to that backup, are you unknowingly processing data that you were not supposed to process? Because in that backup, there might be data that you've, I mean, don't need anymore, and you've not taken them out. So meaning, like the GDPR says, you cannot process data more than necessary, longer than necessary. So therefore, if you go into your backup, you might be processing data that you don't need. So there's the danger of that as well. There must be security training. You must try to educate your staffs about cybersecurity awareness and best practices, and even data protection. It is not meant for your cybersecurity team alone or your security team, and data protection is not meant for your privacy or your data protection team alone. This is a joint effort. It is everybody's responsibility when it comes to information security or data cyber security and data protection. It's everybody's responsibility to be able to follow the rules, so follow the best practice that the organization has laid down. Okay. Again, how do we understand what are understand the role of individuals in data protection and cybersecurity? I've said it earlier on that uh, humans, basically are the weak point in every organization. Okay, so first of all, we need to look at the importance of individual as accountability in compliance. Okay, individuals must understand their roles in ensuring that data protection compliance within an organization as each person's responsibility. Okay, you need to contribute to this. Hence, in organization, you will see they once you come in or a yearly basis, you will do your information security assessment training every year, and your data protection training every year. In some cases, if you will be involved, this is what I've done in the past. If you be involved in maybe it's the data breach in the past, or you involved in a data breach, one of the mitigations I will put in place is for you to go to take another cybersecurity training and data protection training. It could be me training you on that area where you made that mistake. Again, because it happens in organization. Mistake is common. Hence, I always say, if you ever get involved in information security breaches or cyber security or data protection, always report it. Don't be scared. They will be happy that you report it than you keeping it and then leading to something that's not unexpected. So you need to again create a proactive culture in your organization. Okay, that proactive culture, once you've established it, is going to be centered around compliance. It's going to encourage individuals to stay informed and vigilant regarding data protection. And again, engagement of your personnel in compliance initiative. Engaging staff members in data protection and compliance initiative helps to create this culture of accountability. So it's not just only the information team, security team, or the data protection team that is responsible for that. It's everybody in the organization. Hence, that culture of accountability should be always there, because that will lead us to protect the personal data. What about we're talking about fostering a compliance focused mindset? What does that actually mean in your staff? Basically, you encourage your staff to adapt a compliance focused mindset. Is crucial for minimizing risk relating to data breaches. That is the key, because if you know that before you send out maybe a spreadsheet to individuals within your organization, you have to double check that email again to see that it is the right person, because that's the most common mistake you will make in organization, having two names. Maybe you have Harry something and you have Harry Boje. The tendency of you typing Harry in the first place and seeing that, you can just click on the first email address and later you find out that it is the wrong person you're sending it to. So hence it's everybody's responsibility. How individual enhance cybersecurity strategy in organization. Please just let me know if I'm going above time, because it took me time to put these slides together. I was not sure how long it would take me. So please let me know if I'm getting close to time. Again, we need to leverage human resources to boost our cybersecurity, like I've been mentioning before. Individual within organization plays key role in enhancing cybersecurity strategies. You can have all your cybersecurity strategies, all everything in place, but if you as an organization employee doesn't play the part, okay, in terms of human resources, then it will just fail no matter what you're putting in place. Again, you need to influence your workforce involved in cybersecurity. Your workforce that is actively involved in cybersecurity practices significantly reduce potential vulnerability when it comes to cyber attacks. And then we look at personal responsibility in maintaining cybersecurity standard. Yes, we have all standard. The standard, each person, okay, personal commitment to maintaining cybersecurity standard is paramount in the organization, because this will foster a secure organization environment. Because we all know that, yes, we are not supposed to do this. And maybe in worst case scenario, you can put up a whistleblowing strategy in place. So anybody can whistleblow on each other. So, and we have a whistleblowing directive here in the UK or in the EU. Okay. So empowering staff to understand their cybersecurity responsibility is key as well. It is vital to provide employee with comprehensive training that addresses their cybersecurity responsibility. Okay, the significance of clear communication in cybersecurity roles. So again, clear communication regarding the security roles and duties empower to staff. So you need to take the ownership of their responsibility. They need to take their ownership of their responsibility. They know when to say, not to use the organization's laptop to access unscrupulous website, for example, or use this organization laptop for your personal activities. I've seen that a lot. Some organizations will stop you from even opening your Gmail, opening your Yahoo account in their environment. Okay, but some will not. Some just leave it for you to be responsible enough to recognize that you're not supposed to use it. So we need to incorporate feedbacks from personnel for strategy improvement. So you should set up a system whereby you will need to be informing or getting feedback from your organization staff or your employee to engage. When you are engaging staff in discussions about their experiences and their feedback, it can lead to you improving your cybersecurity strategy and your policy. Okay, so feedback is another area where cybersecurity and data protection would intersect. You would need to get this information, because it will lead to you understanding that. Again, the significance of user awareness in enhancing data security measures. What are these? What do I mean by this? Basically, what I'm saying is that once you are enhancing, you can enhance data protection through awareness initiative. So like it says here, the importance of users on cyber education on cybersecurity. So user education plays a pivotal role in enhancing data protection by informing individuals about the threat, about the safe practices. Basically, you are trying to empower them to make informed decisions. Okay. Like, for example, if they see a link, they'll say you get an email to say, click on this link. Are you looking at it that is from the right source? Do you know where that email is coming from? Okay. Is it the same email that you've done before, you've seen before? Is it from your organizations? Have you looked at the headers to see if it's that address is the right address? Okay, you need to be able to recognize vulnerability through users engagement. So when you engage with your user, it can help identify vulnerabilities within an organization. So data protection strategy is that way where there are insight that can lead to effective preventive measures. So once they know that vulnerability, it would lead to them say, okay, first thought, is this a right email? Second, is this email correct? Do I have to click on this? Or if not, I'm not sure. What do I need to do when I'm not sure? Do I need to report it to my manager? Do I need to speak to a colleague? Do I need to speak to IT? So once you recognize this one, it will help your organization basically to move forward. I'm not saying that there's 100% security. Organizations might have all the security they have in security measures, they can place it there. But again, there will just be that little open space of vulnerability where people can come, unscrupulous individuals can come in. Again, promoting responsibility among users for data security. Okay, you need to cultivate this culture, this sense of responsibility among your users. Okay, when it comes to data security. Again, can it lead to a more secure environment? Yes, people will argue yes. Some will argue no. But I should assume that those that will argue yes will be more than that will argue no. So once you have that, everybody becomes more vigilant about potential threat, and that is what we are trying to drive in data cybersecurity and data protection. You try to drive that vigilance. You try to drive that potential threat that people will understand or identify that potential threat immediately. Okay. Okay. Hope I'm doing well with time. Let me see how many slides I've got now. Okay. I think I'm doing well. The role of education in promoting cybersecurity awareness. Okay. It says here in framework for cybersecurity education program. So when you are implementing this structure, it should be a structured education program that can provide users with essential knowledge to recognize and respond to cybersecurity effectively. Again, developing user-centric training model. Okay, what does that mean? So you are tailoring the training model to cater to a specific user, what I call demographic that can significantly enhance the effectiveness of cybersecurity. Education awareness is key because you need to be aware of what is going on. And how do you do that? It is more training of the individual, more engagement with them. So like I said here, the engagement as a cornerstone of data protection measures. So you need to put that engagement. Okay, it should be a more friendly engagement, not not that if people sees that email coming in, they're already scared of it to say, oh no, I'm going to do this course again. They should be kind of happy to do that course. Basically, when you're connecting with the data protection strategy, what does that mean? You need to, again, involving the users, develop that policy, ensure that, I mean, developing policy is the most easiest part, but getting the users to read it and understand it is key. Okay, so different organizations that I've worked for before will have different ways of individual interacting with the policy. Some of them will be kind of they see who have clicked on those policies that have gone into those policies to read it. Like for me, what I would do, I normally set some key policies. So we have sit down with the information security team and my data protection team to say this is the key policy individuals must read, and we engage with the business unit, the lead of those business units, to say, okay, we want you to push this thing to your team. We want them to complete this thing complete this training at X amount of time, and we can also monitor it by seeing you clicking, how many people have clicked on that policy, not just clicking on how long you stayed on those policies. Again, these are some of the information, the security measures you can put in place to protect your personal data. Like I said here, you can empower empowering users through participative approach. So when participation in discussions and decisions regarding data protection empowers the user, it gives them that feel to say, yes, they are involved in it. Like what I will normally do, I will normally go to business unit meeting once a month, just for them to give me at least 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes of that time, just to speak on data protection. It might not be anything relating to what they're doing, but just general protection generally. And then linking up with information security to say, this is what is out there currently. We should be careful of what we do in terms of how we click on links. So empowering users to be security conscious is key in an organization. Okay. So if we now say, like, examine the impact of cybersecurity on data protection, compliance effort. Like it says here, you can have security without data protection, okay? But you cannot have data protection without security, okay? What does that really mean? The majority of data protection enforcement in Europe, I would say basically across the world, is related to security measures. I would say, I mean, in Europe here, in respect to the GDPR, and also we are familiar with in Nigeria, for example, the little breaches that have happened has been linked to cybersecurity issues. Okay, it's related to cybersecurity. It's relating to systems not able to handle some informations or leaking out informations. Okay, so data protection and security are related, but they are not the same. You need to know that they're related, but they are not the same. Okay, security support will support compliance with the GDPR in many ways. Like you have your Article 28, Article 32, your record of processing or data security of processing in the GDPR. That's all cybersecurity related. You need to be able to protect those data. What are you protecting it? Is it through encryption? Are you encrypting the data right from the point of collection, when it's in transit, down to when the data is at rest? When you deal with your cloud providers, are you ensuring that they have enough security information to protect your data? Do you do your carry out your due diligence? Okay, in whatever way, security will support compliance when it comes to data protection. Okay, it will be destruction of personal data. Failure to fully destroy data could lead to retention beyond your specific period, because you have your data limitation and data minimization. You don't want to store your data longer than necessary. You should have a retention schedule. And who is going to help you support that? It's going to be your IT team or your information security team. Again, personnel training. You need to improper trained personnel could make changes to systems that hold personal data that might render that data inaccurate. Okay. How now cybersecurity framework influences data protection? Yeah, I said the impact of cybersecurity on legal compliance. You see that, I mean, there's this cybersecurity, like we said, they are not the same, but they collaborate. I would say use that word, they collaborate with each other. The intersection is great when it comes to data protection and security team. They will sit together. They will always discuss. They will always draw you in as a data protection expert when they are engaging, especially when they are going to onboarding a new vendor or they're engaging in a new system. Okay, they want you to come in to say, okay, this data, you're storing this data, how are you storing it? Is there international data transfer that is affected indeed? How long are you keeping this data for? What is the system? What is the measures that they put in place to protect those data? So the implementation of cybersecurity framework will directly affect how organization meets data protection regulation, which might lead to more robust compliance methodology that they can put in place. Influence of cybersecurity policies on data strategy. Cybersecurity policies must align with your data protection objective. Okay, this will ensure that your organization can mitigate risk associated with data protection breaches. Because like we said before, most of the incidents are data information security related or cybersecurity related. Okay, the key contributors in cybersecurity solutions could be various stakeholders, including your IT professionals, your compliance officer. All this will play a pivotal role in shaping the effective cybersecurity strategy that enhances that data protection. Again, you can see that both of them work hand in hand. But again, you understanding regulatory enforcer and cybersecurity framework. Again, in terms of that, the regulatory bodies such as the GDPR, for example, you already have what you need to do, or you get a fine. But when it comes to cybersecurity, there's not that framework of, say, enforcing lack of security. I say the one that's maybe closer is maybe you need to be certified to ISO 27001 or that. Again, if you're certified, doesn't mean you're not going to put certification, because the way they do your ISO 27001 certification, you pick the area you want to certify in. So if you have 20 entities, you might say, okay, I want to involve 3 of this entity in our certification. Okay, then you are saying, yes, we are certified. Well, if you look at it for yourself, oh, this organization is certified to ISO 27001, but if you come deeper, you will know that it's only few entities or few areas that is certified, or in case of buildings, that is only few buildings that are certified. Okay.
Hi.
Yeah.
Allow me to interject. We're a bit pressed for time.
Yeah.
We're almost towards the end, so perhaps we could rush it a bit. Then we'll have a few minutes to take questions.
Okay. That's what I was saying at the beginning. Okay, so the interplay between cybersecurity and incident data protection, basically we're looking at relationship between data breaches. There's this relationship, there's this stakeholders enrollment and mitigation. Your legal implications comes in there. Again, assessing challenge of compliance in data protection landscape. Identifying the barriers of that is key. Organizations should frequently face these challenges and must align this security with data protection. The role of professionals, compliance efforts plays another role. So the key principles of collaborations between cybersecurity and data protection is basically you understanding the role of cybersecurity professionals, team aligning for unified security missions, basically recognizing the distinct responsibility of cybersecurity and data protection. Okay, yeah, best practices to foster team initiative could be collaborations for staff engagement, creating awareness of data security among personnel, role of communication, need to be able to communicate, or creating the synergy between cybersecurity and data protection team. Identify complementary security framework that will suit them, like your ISO 27001 or ISO 27701, which is the data protection aspect of that ISO standard. Okay, there's importance of training your people. You need to train your staff in terms of best practices. Educating individuals on compliance standard is key. You understanding the compliance standard ensures employees are aware of their responsibility when it comes to data protection. Okay, when we say developing effective training program, or different organizations will have their own training program, basically, but you need to importantly understand the importance of the people in cybersecurity. It must be effective training program and must account for human behavior. Fostering the culture of cybersecurity, meaning everybody understand what cybersecurity means, information security means, how they need to protect those information that they are working on. Here's the future trend. You have your artificial intelligence, which is another area that is coming in, which will give a lot of organizations the headache. Cloud security, we'll talk of the zero trust architecture, privacy enhancing technology. We have all of them there, your IoT, your cloud security, focusing on securing that data in the cloud. You need to assess your vendors, look at their vulnerability before engaging with them. Okay. So again, enhancing data protection through cybersecurity is key. You need to specialize in this area. You need to reduce data protection risk. That's the whole essence of information security and data protection coming hand in hand. You need to have your professional development and integrating cybersecurity into all data protection activities in your organization. Okay. Again, there are some courses that is important in cybersecurity. So this is pivotal in data protection. Cybersecurity courses are essentials for effective data protection strategy. Building resilient security is another area. Safeguarding those sensitive data in terms of you working from the data protection point of view. Effective training to ensure the protection and confidential data are protected against data breaches. I mean, you must ensure that your skill force, your workforce is being developed. You develop them. You as an individual can develop yourself in the area of data protection and information security. Both will come hand in hand. Okay, the importance, enhance the data protection through awareness. So there's importance of education, I mentioned many times, recognizing vulnerability through users' engagement, role of users in implementing security measures and promoting responsibility among users. Okay, the key takeaway here is basically importance of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is essential for protecting sensitive data. Like I said, it depends on how you want to process those data through encryption and through other means. Again, understanding the best practices. So it's a continual process that you must understand the fundamental concept of best practices when it comes to data security. The role of encryption plays a big role. Are you going to encrypt your data in the course of safeguarding those data? Would you be able to safeguard the integrity, the confidentiality, like I talked about before, the CIA confidentiality, integrity, and availability of those data, adapting the trend, staying informed about emerging trend when it comes to organization adapting to ensure that you're meeting either information security standard or you're following your data protection standard. Okay, I think, yeah, thank you, Hugman, for listening to me. I rushed it towards the end, but I thought this is something that will happen because there was not enough time to actually dig into this topic. I had to reduce a lot of the slide to be able to meet this 30, 40 minutes. And especially because if I train, I like to explain. I'm a trainer, so you can see that in my explanation. So forgive me if I ran out of time and rushed it towards the end. We have other webinars. My organization have other webinars that will come up with information security address. So thank you then for listening. Over to you, Abigail.
Thank you very much, Harry. Thank you very much. That was a very lovely presentation. Thank you for the explanations, very well explained. I think we can take a minute or two just to go through some of the questions that were posted. First of all, you spoke about best practices, and there's a question about data loss prevention tools. How critical is it implementing a data loss prevention solution as a best practice? So the criticality of that. And then we can also answer the question about courses. Somebody would like to know how to access the courses at the Data Privacy and Protection Academy. And then there'll be another question which will post after.
Okay, thanks. So in terms of the data loss prevention, like I've said earlier, it depends on the organization, what they want to put in place, because these tools are not cheap. But I will always say you should have at least one data loss prevention, because what that does is, if, for example, you are trying to upload some certain documents that you are not supposed to send out of the downloads or uploads of certain documents, so another cloud provider, you are stealing document, your data loss prevention will spot that immediately. When you are sending an email out, the data loss prevention tool will first of all go into those email and see what kind of attachment you've had in it to be going out. So again, it depends on the organization. It's not a cheap tool if they want to go for data protection. It depends on the data, kind of data that they're processing. In terms of you want to access the data protection course, like I have the QR code, you can scan this or go to our website, dataprotectionacademy.net. We have a lot of information there as well. And once I see your messages, then I can respond. I respond to you.
Okay. And then the final two questions. One is on the DPO and the CISO, that's a Certified Information Security Officer. Can an organization have one person do those two job descriptions, and what are the implications? And then we can also answer how common is this monitoring built into cybersecurity systems of organizations, and are employees warned that they are being monitored?
Yes. So, I'll take the last one. For the kind of tools that you're going to be installing on your system, if it's a monitoring tool, you will need to inform your employees basically out of transparency, because if you don't, you might be breaking that law. If you can, I don't know if you've gone around, you've read about the Amazon being fined, I think what, like 700 million by the French Supervisory Authority for lack of transparency, because they were installing tools to monitor the employee and they didn't inform the employee of that, which led them to that fine. What was the first question again? I just lost Lisa.
The other one was on the DPO, the Data Protection Officer, and the CISO.
So both roles are of senior roles. So organizations should be careful to not to appoint a CSO, Chief Security Officer, as a data protection officer, because according to the regulation, that will be a conflict of interest, because the CSO makes decisions on some certain data when it comes to information security. So if they are both, and there's a breach, for example, as a DPO, you might want to sugarcoat it and not report it as the sitting DPO will report. So I always advise those two rules are two senior rules in information security and cyber and data protection. So they should be separate, because if they are together, it's going to be a conflict of interest.
Okay. I think the other questions might also be sent and then put in the group, but I think that's enough. Those are the last questions we have. Again, thank you very, very much. And because of time, I will now introduce the second speaker. Again, thank you, Mr. Hari.
Thank you very much, Abigail.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your attention. Thank you for your participation so far. Kind reminder that the session is being recorded. The other reminder is on the chat function. Kindly use it to post all the questions you may have. Again, also regarding the slides, they will be sent. They will be on the website as well as the YouTube channel. You also find this recording on the YouTube channel. Now to introduce our second speaker for today, Amaka Ibeji. It's lovely to see you again. I had moderated a session with her last year, so it is lovely to see you again. Thank you for taking us through our second session for the day. And Amaka today will be taking us through AI, big data, and privacy implications. Allow me to quickly read her profile as well. Another extensive profile. Today we have lovely, lovely speakers. Amaka is a distinguished and digital trust leader and AI governance and data protection compliance advisor with over 15 years experience in privacy engineering, cybersecurity, and reasonable data utilization. She's also holding multiple globally recognized certifications, including AIGP, that's the artificial intelligence one, Certified Information Privacy Manager, CIPP, CISSP, CISA, CISM. That is lovely. As the founder of Pulse Hub, a digital trust and assurance company, she provides coaching and consultancy services to individuals and organizations on privacy and AI governance. She's also the founder of DPO Network, that's Data Privacy Organization Africa Network, and an initiative dedicated to empowering data protection officers across the continent. Amaka's thought leadership extends to her weekly column on digital trust for Africa boards in Business Daily Online. Her professional journey in pivotal roles includes pivotal roles at Microsoft, Cruise LLC, and UBA, where she shaped AI strategy, privacy controls, and product development. As a faculty member of the International Association of Privacy Professionals and the Digital Directors Network, Amaka continues to influence global discussions on digital trust and governance. She's on a mission to bridge global best practices with Africa's unique digital challenges, positioning digital trust as a competitive advantage for African organizations. Through her initiatives, podcasts, and writing, she strives to empower the next generation of technology professionals and champion responsible innovation across the continent. Thank you and very welcome. Amaka Ibeji, it's lovely to have you. You can take us through our next session.
Awesome. Thanks, Abigail, for doing that. It's sometimes a little uncomfortable to get your profile being read, but it's all good. And so I like that today's session actually started with security, data protection. And the previous speaker, Harry, has clearly mentioned that we can have data protection without privacy, or you could say we can have security without privacy, but we cannot have privacy without security. A very key statement that he made. And so I hope everyone can see my slide. And so what I would be doing today is going through AI, big data, and privacy implication. And I mean, this is a big topic that I've been given, but I have about 40 minutes to do justice to the topic. So we will be looking at ethical considerations, privacy risk, and regulatory challenges of AI and big data analytics. If you are here on day one, you'll see that we've spent time looking through some of the regulatory challenges. And so I will spend a number of time in the other areas. Abigail has read about me, but I will just go on to today's agenda. And bear in mind today, as I navigate this topic, I'll be sharing tons of stories because I think these real life cases will help us understand what we're talking about. Because I always say that privacy risk is personal because the harms affect individuals. And so it's important that we pay close attention to this. So I'll start off right off the bat looking at the core concept. What is AI? What is big data? And of course, privacy. Let us set the stage there with also examples on privacy risks that have occurred, and then we'll look at ethical consideration beyond privacy. And we will come back to looking through privacy risk, having understood ethical consideration, having understood the example set. We'll look at privacy risk, also spend some time on the regulatory challenges. What are those challenges regulators are facing? Because this is an intersection between legal and technological challenges. And truly, when we talk about data privacy, it is on the continuum between legal and technology, because this legal framework has to be operationalized, and operationalizing it that's where the technical individuals come to play. And I do not want to leave you with all doom, but also sharing some mitigation strategies you can begin to explore in your organization, or even as an individual seeking to gain depth into this area. And then we'll wrap up with key takeaway. I've got 2 goals today. The first is to demystify what AI, big data, and privacy is. I will set the stage with the context, but throughout the presentation, we will continue to talk about it. And really, I want you all to leave this conversation with actionable insight. For some of you, it will spark some interest to wanting to commit your career in this field. For some of you, you might be on the legal and it might also spark interest into what is obtainable on the technological front. And for some of the technologists on the call, it might also give you insight into what privacy looks like on a day-to-day basis. And my examples have been carefully garnered from different parts of the world. So it's very important that we set the context and we learn our lessons, because when we look at Africa and we look at the digital transformation that is ongoing, it's important that we learn the lessons from those who have had mishaps in the past so that we do not repeat those. So it's really critical that we really study history, see where things have gone wrong. And so when we decide to design and build from ground up, we're baking in those lessons into it. So let's start off with the core concept: AI, big data, and privacy. When we talk about AI, basically on a very basic level, I have another presentation I did previously expanding on AI. But for today, I want you to walk away knowing that AI is just software machines trying to mimic human intelligence. And the concept of artificial intelligence dates back to 1956, the Diamond Conference, where different disciplines had to come together to really break down the silos, mathematics, computer science, philosophy, coming together in a room to say, how can we create a machine that can simulate human reasoning? So that's really the goal of artificial intelligence. And I say this so that you don't walk away from today's session thinking AI is just the new shining thing. No, it's been there through the summers and the winters of AI. AI has withstood the journey. And in simulating human intelligence, one key thing I want you to know is when you compare it with traditional application, my background I started with software development starting off. When you want to develop an application, typically you look at business logic. Say, for example, a logistics company, they've got 100 inventory. You want to program number of inventory, and when anyone orders the inventory, it automatically deducts it by the number of orders. That is traditional application. If you've done this over the past 10 years, you must have collected an amount of data. And so that data that you've collected, what AI does is AI can look over that data to say, it seems in January, we actually fulfill all of the orders, and we also have orders come in that we are not able to fulfill based on our capacity. And so AI now gives you insight to say, in 2025, this January, please do not just stock up for 100, stock up for 150, because probably it's school season, there will be a higher order. So that is rich insight based on the data that has been collected over the years. And so when we talk about big data, just as the name implies, it is big data, data that has been collected over time. And what is one of the key drivers of big data is the internet. We also have Internet of Things. We have tons of sensors on cars, on even our equipment at home. Think about your refrigerator. Think about your cleaning devices like Roomba and the likes. They collect tons of data. So there is this big data that AI needs to be able to make predictions or the like. So, and having these two, we begin to ask ourselves, so what? Now, because a lot of these models are designed for you and I, it means that personal data more often than not is being fed into these models. It's being collected as part of the big data. And when we think about privacy, from my own position, I always like to say personal privacy is really about right to control personal information from misuse. And it has two prongs. As an individual, I need to have control, because context changes. Today, I'm on social media. In the last 10 years, I probably did not want to be out there. So I could regulate how I wanted to be seen. That is control. Maybe in the next 2 years, I have a very sensitive position in the government and I do not want to be out there. I can dial back. So that is my control. Also, as an organization, we collect this large amount of data. We should also have controls to regulate it from misuse and sharing with third party, misuse within organizations, especially when you work in big tech or big organizations that have different departments. We should be able to control the data and the use of data. So I want to share two examples. And this example, the first one is from the 1990s, the mid 1990s, and the second one is also early 2000. If you look there, you will see the lady there, her name is Latanya Sweeney. What had happened is Massachusetts, the story actually dates to was centered in Massachusetts, where the article there said anonymized data really isn't anonymized, because as privacy professionals, one of the things we like to think about is, once the data is anonymized, then it's free to be shared, it's free to be used. We think about personal data, personal identifiable data, and remove it from a data set. But in this particular scenario, there was supposed to be a research, and the governor at the time asked that the data be anonymized for the employees of the states, their health data. And so it was released. What Latanya Sweeney did was to go purchase voters' record for just $20. And then she looked up this record and she was able to identify the governor's medical record, because he had a medical emergency earlier on. So she had to pick up all of those things. And bear in mind that this record that was released did not have the names, did not have social security numbers of these employees, the state employees. at the time, it was deemed to have been anonymized, but it had the zip code of each person, it had the birth date, and it had sex. Someone might say, well, do you know how many babies get born a day? Why would your date of birth be unique? Based on her findings, we see that that is flawed, because even in the United States at the time, over 87% of people can be re-identified given these 3 data points: the zip code, birthday, and sex. That's the gender. Fast forward a decade, Netflix had a competition, and a number of you would be aware of Netflix. Had a competition. They wanted to improve their algorithm. Think about watching your Netflix show, and you're binge watching, you're done with one, it recommends another one, and that is also as good as the one you previously watched. That is all AI happening in the mix. But at the time in 2006, it released this competition that if anyone could help design an algorithm that is 10% better than what they currently have, there's a grand prize for $1 million. Trust me, a number of researchers jumped on this and were working hard on this. But an individual, Arvind, an Indian-born individual, he looked at this data set and said to himself, this can be, I can re-identify individuals off of this. And so what he did was to do a lookup of this data set with IMDb, the internet movie database, and he was able to re-identify individuals. In fact, this case led to about 4 class action lawsuits against Netflix, which was, I think, settled with the plaintiffs and was voluntarily dismissed. Of course, the competition was canceled, but it still lingers as an embarrassing case for Netflix. Think about it, a decade after. Netflix had learned from Latin and Sweeney. They had tried to even further de-identify the data, but we see that re-identification was still possible. So when it comes to privacy, we need people who are constantly thinking, looking at what can go wrong. That is very important. And we'll talk more on privacy risk. But for now, I want you to hold that thought in mind, because one of the lessons that we can hear here is removing personal identifiable information from data sets is not enough to de-identify data. And that is really very important. Next, we're going to look at ethical considerations in AI and big data beyond just privacy. 3 things I really want to talk about here is fairness, or we say bias, right? Transparency and accountability. And we've talked about transparency a lot. Accountability is also important. And I will be sharing 3 examples here with regards to bias in AI. An example that comes to mind is the Amazon hiring algorithm. So in 2014, Amazon had an experimental AI recruiting tool. What had happened is, over the decade, Amazon had collected resume for, from job candidates, from applicants. And so now they had brought in an AI tool. What did they feed the AI tool with? They fed the AI tool with the resumes that had been submitted. And what we learned is that this AI tool became this, began to discriminate against female applicants. Why was that? Because the data that had been fed was tons of data on white males who had, or male candidate, predominantly male candidate who had applied in the past. And so when women started applying, they weren't making it through, simply because the AI had learned that the people who got hired in this role were male candidates and they made it through. And so it didn't necessarily mean that the tool, the data fed in identified these individuals as male, but the AI tool was able to pick it. And so even if I submitted my resume to Amazon at the time and Amazon could not tell that my name was female sounding, if I had gone to an all-girls high school, it clearly shows that I'm female, and so it would even discriminate against me. So begin to think about it, how historical data impacts the outcome that AI has. I'll pause for now because I think someone has their hands raised, but else I could take the questions at the end.
Yes.
The second,
sorry,
continue.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. The second example that I want to give is an article that I have just recently written on the Very Dark Man NGO case. If you're Nigerian, you'll be familiar with this individual. What he had done was to create an NGO and obtain donor fund, but in a bid to be transparent, he released his bank statement. And when we did an analysis of this bank statement, we saw that all the donors who had donated to this, we could see clearly their names, the amounts they contributed, and just the way you do bank transfers, and you can include notes. Some individuals were including notes. Some were saying they are broke. Some were saying I'm your fan. Some were saying I'm from Togo. All of that information is personal information because it felt like they were sending it directly to him. But now this was being published in a bid for transparency. We also went further to look at the account number. For example, I think it's PalmPay. PalmPay uses individuals' phone numbers as account number. So there you have it again. We have a number of individuals with their phone numbers being displayed out there. Additionally, we did another filter to see who were the highest donors. Now we could also see that there were some individuals who donated this amount, and we could see their full legal name. So when we think about it, there's a lot of trade-offs. Yesterday, someone had mentioned even trade-off between transparency and trade secret. We have trade-offs between privacy and accuracy. So all of this is something that one needs to continue to think about. You know, a friend of mine, Brian Lee, always says privacy is a wicked problem. You attack it from here, and then you have an opening in another angle. So you've got to be thinking 360 at every time T. The last one I want to talk about here is accountability and explainability. This particular one, I would share a scenario of the Apple Card controversy. So what had happened is a man had gone to apply for the Apple credit card, and he and his wife, who shared pretty much their financial lives together, and he had gotten a higher rating, a higher limit compared to his wife. And because they are couples, he could tell that his wife was even of a better financial standing than he was. And so it did not make sense why she got a lower rating. Fast forward, if you follow the trend of the story, another lady said, what does this mean? This is an influential lady. She called up her friends, I think 6 ladies and 6 men. They all went to apply for it. And the men who were not even of better financial standing as they were got better ratings than the ladies in this small experiment also. So it raised a number of questions on why that was, the discriminatory nature of it. And the bank that's supporting Apple, that's Goldman Sachs, said, hey, we did not use anything gender in this. However, they couldn't really explain at the time why this was happening. So when we think about AI, explainability becomes important. And that leads to accountability, because for you to be accountable, you need to be able to make good explanation. And we know that AI can sometimes be a black box. So thinking through how can we rationalize our decision, what features is being used. And again, you also need to be aware that eliminating a particular feature doesn't mean that AI isn't relying on that feature. And by that, we call it proxy feature. Take, for example, if I pick your movie watch over, say, the last 1 year, I might be able to tell that you are maybe Nigeria because you watch a lot of Nollywood. That's an inference, and that means something. So even if I don't have your name, I don't have your location, just looking at your watch history, I could tell that where you're from or where your interest lies, and that could tell me a couple of things about you. And that goes back to big data being fed into AI, because AI now is getting into big data and pulling in those subtle analysis that you and I might not think about. And so that's why we need to have control over that. So that being said, around the ethical considerations we should be thinking when we move from just collecting data, now making it big data, and moving this big data into AI. Let's talk about privacy risk of AI, because this is, why we have this masterclass. When we think about privacy risk, we always want to think about what is the risk to the individual? What is the risk to the individual? We've talked about the Netflix case, about data linking and profiling. And more often than not, privacy engineers, privacy analysts have good intentions. You've analyzed the case and this looks anonymous in quotes to you, or it's been de-identified sufficiently. However, you should also think broadly about context. Is this data being released externally? If it's being released externally, it increases the risk. What other data points is out there in the ecosystem? Or what other data points might be released in the data ecosystem that would lead to a correlation and also lead to data linkage and also identifying individuals? It's something you have to constantly be thinking about. Another risk we can talk about is surveillance and tracking. Now, we can talk about data surveillance on multiple levels, but I want to give an example on fitness tracker where a lady was able to catch, in a sense, her ex-boyfriend's infidelity. And this lady, her name is Jane Slater. What she had done, or what she had noticed, is that at an odd time, because both fitness tracker was linked, and she was able to notice unusual activity patterns on her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend's device. And doing that at that odd time and not being able to track where he was able to lead her to confront him and accuse him of infidelity. Now, this is something that one could chuckle about, but think about a number of us who were at fitness tracker, who has access to that information, okay, who has access to, go ahead. For me. Okay, I think it's someone talking, but you could mute yourself. So think think about who has access to that information. And because your fitness, and I'm just using fitness as an example for surveillance, having that can tell any individual where you are. And another thing is telling people where you are can tell a lot about you. Say, for example, at 8 a.m., you could see me leaving my house to a particular location, and at 5 p.m., I'm returning from that location to my home. You could, and that is Monday to Friday over a year's period, you could infer that, oh, I live here and I work in this place. If on Tuesday, sometime around noon, I'm leaving from my workplace to a health facility, and maybe that health facility is Cancer Institute, and I go there regularly, maybe on Tuesdays, you could infer that, oh, if she works in this particular tech company, she's not a doctor, so she might have cancer because she's going to a cancer institute. And so that's sensitive information that can be picked up just by the device you're wearing, or even the phone that you carry, or even your Uber trips. So think about those. Let's take another example here on privacy risk. Talk about manipulation. Harry had talked about doing phishing attack, but in the age of AI, it has gone beyond phishing attack, and having all of this piece of information about you can lead to targeted advertising, which can be double-edged sword. While it's good for enhanced personalization, you get the adverts that you want and things like that, it can also be used to manipulate people's behavior, and that is critical, which influences what people do, what people buy, and even how people vote. So the example I want to give here is on the deepfake CEO, which happened in Hong Kong. An employee was called into a meeting, and this was all deep fake. Everyone on the call were all AI avatars, and these were his colleagues. So they gave instructions to him to move an amount of money, and he had moved $25 million based on the instruction. And it was not a one-on-one call. If not, he probably would have said, oh, why me? He had his other colleagues on the call, but at the time, he did not know that they were all deepfake because they were talking and all of that. How did they get those images? How did they get the voice? I'm speaking to you all. This is being recorded. My voice is out there. My image is out there. Anyone can make an avatar of me. So we are dealing with a huge privacy risk. And always remember, I tell people that when we put about regulations, it regulates people who are responsible. It does not necessarily regulate the criminals out there. So we need to put on our adversarial thinking hat when we're dealing with these challenges. The last one I'll talk about is challenges with data subject rights, because data goes into AI doesn't mean we can go out there and typically erase it. And I think tomorrow someone is going to expand on data subject rights. But I will give a practical example here, and this example is from India, a welfare situation where an AI solution that had been used to manage criminals was now repurposed for welfare. And in this instance, an individual was denied welfare, or individuals, over 100,000 individuals were denied welfare simply because the AI determined that these were fraudulent requests. These individuals even came to the offices, and the people managing this AI solution trusted the AI over the people that they could see. And that comes to over-reliance. And so with regards to this, imagine people who are impoverished, seeking welfare and being denied because of an AI tool. That is real harm. That is leading people into hunger and not even having a suitable way for recourse. So think through all of this harm. And one thing with privacy is putting yourself in the shoes of others is very important in your privacy journey. That being said, I will just touch on regulatory challenges as we begin to wrap up so that I can take your questions. I put out 3 things out here, and like I said, this has been overly flogged yesterday. there is continuous technological evolution. When I worked at Microsoft, I worked in research and incubation, where I really sat on next generation AI solution. When you think about the benefits, it's amazing. But there are challenges, and so there has to be this balancing act. And why is this a regulatory challenge? Because you could see the benefit, but the regulators are not even in the room. Some might not even understand the nitty-gritty of how this technology may be regulated. Why? Because you cannot overregulate. Overregulating meaning you're denying citizens, you're denying individuals benefits that one can unlock from this innovation. So there has to be that critical balancing act. So rapid technological evolution is one of the challenges, and the regulators will have to keep up with. Another is the complex compliance framework. And this is one reason why I started the DPO Africa network, because across Africa, we have different regulation with regards to data protection. But how can we come together and look for what is the standard and how can we communicate with ourselves? That would lead to harmonization, complex compliance framework, because without addressing this, I mean, complying is hard work on its own, and then complicating it across the different markets is something that we must address and harmonize. And I'll share the link to all of these things in the chat at a go once I'm done with the presentation. That's one thing we should think about. Accountability and monitoring of AI systems. I shared those examples that have been identified. Think about the Amazon hiring scenario, the Apple Card scenario. If these influential individuals had not spoken up, it would continue to persist. And what that means is people will continue to be denied and not even knowing why. Imagine someone being denied a job application. It has an impact on the economic situation of the family, for the children, and even for the community. So that is why this is a really important core, that not only deploying these solutions, but also tracking. Like we saw in the case, these individuals did not even use gender, but AI picked it up by proxy. And so through monitoring and accountability, you can catch these things early on and ensure that individuals do not face harm. We talk about group harm, societal harm, but I say societal harm, group harm affects people on an individual level. So we should really pay attention to this. Okay, I'm winding down now on the mitigation strategies. If you're wondering, oh my God, this is a lot to take in. Yes, it is a lot to take in, but there is definitely a way out of it. And that is why I'm amazed by the number of people on this call, because the sheer intelligence, the sheer brilliance that we share can really position us on the right footing, even on the continent. The first thing to think about is privacy by design. We need to get early into the privacy principles. Don't get distracted by the noise. The landscape is continuously evolving. If you know the principles, you will stand the test of time, because irrespective of the technology, you will default to your principles. I always say professionals, people who go pro, do always get excited by the principles. So stay with the principles throughout the journey. And as you develop in your organization, ensure that you're keeping tab on all the principles and it's embedded into everything that you build. AI ethics, AI risk ethics is beyond privacy. We talked about fairness, we talked about transparency, we talked about accountability. So always conduct this audit and check, monitor at every time. One thing that time will not permit us to really get into on this call is privacy enhancing technologies. Even if you're on the legal side of things, it makes sense to have an appreciation of these privacy enhancing technologies, so that when you're proposing a solution, you can refer to these technologies to be implemented in your solution. All we want is to minimize the risk while amplifying the benefit of the innovation that you are designing for the benefit of everyone and the society. Build capacity. I wouldn't even talk so much about training and certification. Harry has done justice on this piece, but keep training, keep building, keep learning, follow thought leaders out there. Just because of the request I'm getting in March, I would be doing, more of a training around privacy and helping people understand the fundamentals and how to build up and scale up, even for those who want to become BPOs or just privacy engineers or privacy analysts. So pay attention to training. Global collaboration. I always say that in Africa, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Let us learn, but let us also customize to suit our context, so that we can run that. We don't have the time to go rebuild, but we can always take what is all around us and through our shared brilliance, come up with something that the global stage will be proud of, and even Africans will be proud of as well. And so I get to the key takeaway from today's session. I've got two takeaways, just the way I had two goals at the start to demystify AI, big data, and privacy, and also to leave you with actionable insight. Takeaway here is I need you to know that privacy is about trust and ethical innovation. It's not about slowing down things, but it's about building things responsibly. You would always need to see yourself in the shoes of the people that you serve. So it's a huge call to be an advocate, to also be an ambassador, to also think architecturally as you build those systems. Also think adversarially. What would an adversary do when this data is out there, when this application is released? And lastly, think altruistic. How would user use it? Will they love it? Will this be an amazing experience? You want to think through this three-pronged approach. And lastly, I want to say that your journey can make a lasting digital impact. And it's not just about what you will make in terms of salary, because of course it is a juicy one, but the fact that you know that what you're developing, what you're shaping, can ensure that the man who needs his welfare benefit gets it. You can ensure that the most qualified candidate gets hired irrespective of their gender. There is just so much that we can do in this space, and we are at the infancy of this journey. But I trust that with your sheer brilliance, when we apply our minds to this, we can make magic happen. And so I want to wrap up by saying thank you for listening to me. I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn if you're not connected with me. I will share the links, a ton of links of what I've shared today in the chat. The slides will be available even to the community that I have mentioned. And so at this point, I invite you all into question and answers and also insight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amaka. That was lovely. Enough comments about how lovely that presentation was and what a great breakdown of the concepts. And so we can have a few minutes, we can take a few questions. There are three questions that I will bring together since they seem similar. One is of the use of AI in employment situations, especially where when you're employing people, especially during the contracting stage. And then on that still, where AI comes in, do you think then consent then will be, say, let me get the exact question. What is the opinion on AI and AI in the employment situation? And do you believe that consent may be undermined, especially given the increasing use of AI and AI tools in personal data processing? There's also the question the right to opt out. What is your perspective on the right to opt out? Do you think it should be a practice and a must practice on platforms? And then again, balancing the perspective of freedom of expression, individual privacy, and government regulation prevent the use of AI. So we're looking at consent, right to opt out, and the balance between those freedoms.
So when we look at privacy principles, the first thing we look at is legitimacy. That's going back to GDPR, which has kind of been replicated in many regions, is legitimacy, lawfulness, fairness, and things like that. And so based on that, before processing data, one of the things we need to ask ourselves is what's the legal basis for this? And when we talk about legal basis, if we look at GDPR, we have about, I think, 6 legal bases to processing this. Consent is one of them. It doesn't mean it's the only one. There are instances where consent will not fly, especially when we're looking at power dynamics between employee and employer. I mean, if you tell me I need your consent to do this, of course, I'm going to, because I get my paycheck. So that will not be freely given. And so that disqualifies the legal basis of consent. There are other vehicles. Legitimate interest can be one of them. Of course, in some other regions, legitimate interest is not even on the table as one of the legal bases. So the first thing you need to work with your lawyers is what's the legitimate basis that we are relying on, and it has to be documented. If it's a contractual relationship, then this is what we're going with. So that's the first thing. What's the second question?
The second question was on the right to opt out, balancing that freedom, and should it be a compulsory section in, for example, a website, balancing that right to opt out versus the freedoms of the individual data subject?
Yeah, so when you go back to my slide that talked about the definition of privacy, that was why I clearly stated, when you think through it, privacy is actually about control for the individual. So when you have a solid privacy design, you've ensured control. And that is, I can opt in today, and tomorrow my context changes and I decide to opt out. So on a principle level, opting in, opting out is where to go. However, in regions, you could have, you're supposed to opt in here, in another, you're supposed to opt out. Opt in and opt out is 2 different things. Even though they look alike, it's very different. So number one, you should understand what regions you're playing in and how are you building your tech stack to accommodate for that. And secondly, in design, please give people control. And that is when you respect their individuality, their autonomy. For example, the very dark man case that published his financial statement, there is a financial transparency notice on the website, but notice is not concept. If we want to start getting into all of those technical wits, it's not. Yes, you said you're going to, but what if I'm okay with it today, but tomorrow I haven't paid my landlord and my landlord is looking at that and I quickly want to take that out? Let's be very practical, because this is about personal life, right? So we want to, sometimes it's even embarrassing. What if I donated just 100 naira and tomorrow I'm out there on Instagram living the very soft life, and then there is no alignment, and like, oh, she's very stingy. That's a stigma. That's something that can impact an individual. So perception is very key. So the ability to take control of your digital footprint is very critical when we talk about privacy.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll take one more question from the chat, and then we'll have one more person give their question. What is your perspective on balancing the freedom of expression, individual privacy, and government regulation to prevent the misuse of AI?
Take that question again.
The question is your perspective on balancing the freedom of expression of an individual, then their privacy as well, and then government regulation. Where is the balance in all that, but still trying to prevent the misuse of AI?
So this is two-pronged. Freedom of expression is a fundamental human right. People should be able to freely express themselves. But in AI misuse instance, we begin to talk about manipulation. For example, there was an election in India where a deepfakes video had come out. The opponent was actually praising or condemning the party. And in split seconds, people had switched their votes because, trust me, people believe these things. You and I can roll our eyes and say, come on, how can? But it is effective, and that is why it continues to persist. And so what you and I should do is, how can we ensure that we have control mitigating this? And so the government should have regulations against this. However, regulations is for responsible individuals, for people who just want to play pranks and not real criminals. So that's one, but there should be technological measures to be able to identify these deepfakes, and that is something that is in the works.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you can, 1 more minute, we can have a question from Susan Uteno. For anybody else, the questions are so many, but we'll still send them to Yamaka, and perhaps over time we can have them answered maybe in the website.
Oh, sure. I'm even sharing some of the links of some of the things that I had referred to for, people who are like me that wants to just do a deep dive or just, entertain yourself.
All right, Susan, there, perhaps you can give your question. Anybody else, please type your questions in the chat. We'll keep them saved for Amaka to answer in a bit.
Okay, thank you, Abigail. Thank you so much for the presentation, Amaka. I'm curious as to your perspective on the Internet of Things, specifically this phenomena that seems to be a logical kind of consequence of the Internet of Things, and it's called the Internet of Behaviors. And it's basically a combination of technology, analysis of data generated, and behavioral psychology, right? So an example would be, for example, patients and employees' location data in hospitals during COVID-19, when they try to identify the behaviors that spread or mitigate the virus. And, in this situation, you have a competing interests. There's public safety, and then there's also kind of respecting the individual's right to privacy, right? And also the respective data protection laws. So in your opinion, or in your mind, how do you see, from a governance perspective, this being kind of balanced out? Do you think that, it might lead to kind of predatory practices, or what's your perspective?
As with everything technology, there's always two sides. There's always two sides to the equation. In fact, you talked about Internet of Things, you talked about behavioral analytics on that. That is not new, and that continues to persist. In fact, recently I read that people can detect so much from the way that your voice sounds, from your voice notes, by the choice of words that you use. They can also detect your emotional state, which can also be used for targeted advertising, and that leads to manipulation, because in your vulnerable state, you might be willing to spend more. And so there's a whole lot about it. We can even talk about the attention economy, right? What you give attention to, and how can we introduce there's this thing called addiction. How can we introduce addiction to all of the social media things that you're doing? Those things have been studied, and humans are very predictable. And so there is the downside to it. In fact, I'm going to be teaching on the China regulation next month again. When you study China, for the children, I know we're not talking about children, they have stated it in law that there should be anti-addictive mechanisms in anything that has to do with kids, because they want to develop their minds. We're not even there yet. We're not even talking about that. And so, to your point, when it comes to governance, the first thing is awareness. But awareness alone will not do the work. The second thing is, how are we regulating these organizations? And for you to regulate, you need to be able to understand the subtle difference between personalization and manipulation, because it's a very subtle difference. And so once you can get a hold on it, once you can standardize it, once you can get to a place where it becomes repeatable, then you get to governance. And so that is where we start having the conversation to minimize this. Else, what has happened in the past is we take precedents, cases of things that have gone wrong. Think about the young man who killed himself just because he was addicted to an AI avatar, right? We take all of those precedents and use that in regulating going forward. So to think about it broadly, is there a clear answer to it? The answer is no, but it is emerging. And secondly, you and I, what we can do is, there's this popular thing that says, when you see something, say something. When it's gone wrong, document it, write about it. Because when these officials, the regulators, want to work on this, they want to gather all of this insight. So don't let your experience go to waste. And that is something I cry from the rooftop to all of my friends on the continent. Anything you say, write about it, tweet about it, put it on LinkedIn. This is my experience. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be polished. Because when someone like me comes in and wants to write about it, I want to pull all of those stories, but I cannot know it if you only share it in your household. So that's something that I can share broadly, but as you can tell, there's always a benefit, and those organizations who are reaping the benefit will continue to fund it, and it becomes a lost cause. But I think I would wrap up by saying your voice matters, and do not discredit yourself in this journey. Thank you. But there's a lot to talk about that. I like that question.
Okay.
Someone else answer.
Okay, thank you so much, Amaka, for that. I think we'll wrap it up there. We're at the end of our time, but I want to thank you again for this time you have shared, and thank you for this lovely presentation and the breakdown of those concepts. For any other questions, they will also be sent to you. The slides will also be shared to you. Again, kind reminder that the session is being recorded, and you will get the recording of this session. Thank you once again, Amaka.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the time. Bye for now. Bye, you all. Enjoy the rest of the sessions.
Thank you. All right, thank you everyone for staying on. We're a bit pressed for time, but we'll still keep on to the next session. Next session, we have Winnie Ngige. Winnie Ngige is a data privacy and professional here in Kenya. She will be taking us through biometric data collection and consent. Winnie is an accomplished privacy and data protection specialist. She has over 5 years of experience. This is an intersection between data privacy and data protection, technological policy, and digital rights. She also holds a degree in law and prestigious certifications such as the CIPP and CIPM from the International Association of Privacy Professionals. Throughout her career, Winnie has provided expert data protection advice to organizations such as in different sectors, for example, insurance, banking, fintech, healthcare, faith-based organizations, and education institutions. She's renowned for her meticulous approach to crafting and implementing robust control measures that protect personal data and ensure compliance with the evolving regulatory standards. Beyond compliance, Winnie's passion lies in tech policy, AI governance, and digital rights. These are areas where she's made significant contributions through her published works. Most notably, I can also remember from LinkedIn. You must have seen her posts here and there. Notably, she's also an author data protection. She's also co-authored a data protection handbook offering key insights into compliance frameworks in Kenya. Her ability to navigate complexities of data privacy laws and technology governance has earned her reputation as a trusted advisor. Committed to safeguarding digital landscapes while advancing knowledge and policy within the technology landscape. Winnie, welcome, and thank you for taking up this third session for the day, for day 2. Perhaps you can say a quick hello, and then I can get your slides ready.
Hello. Hi, Abigail. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Okay, thank you. Like Maka mentioned, it's very awkward to speak after the introduction. I don't know what else to what else to say, but it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot for the invitation. And looking
Thank you
forward
as
to this session.
Okay. So perhaps there can be a confirmation that you can see my screen, and then we'll move forward.
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, good. Winnie, perhaps you can adjust your mic a little bit. We're losing you.
Okay. Oh, what about now? Can you hear me? Abigail? Hello?
Yes, you're very clear from my end. I don't know if everybody else is, but
Yes, we can hear her.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
Yeah, so for this session, we'll be looking at biometric data collection and consent. We'll also be looking at a few case studies where organizations have either been fined or they've been given enforcement notices for not processing biometric data in a way that is acceptable under the different data protection laws. So we'll be looking at what biometric data is, why is it classified as sensitive personal data. We're also going to look at the legal basis for processing sensitive personal data. We'll look at a few determinations. We'll also examine a few risk management and governance frameworks that you can use when you're processing biometric data. We'll also touch a bit on emerging trends and technological use of biometric data. I know this has already been touched heavily by Amaka, so maybe we will not go too deep into it. And at the end of it all, I hope you're going to have good takeaways and practical steps on how you'll ensure that your organization is compliant when it's handling biometric data. So the first place we'll start is just understanding what is biometric and sensitive personal data. So the key thing here is to note that not all data protection laws have a definition of what sensitive personal data really is. Most of them just list what sensitive personal data categories are, but the only law that I found to have a proper definition of what sensitive personal data is the China Data Protection Law, which you're going to look at how it defines sensitive personal data. But from my perspective, I'd say sensitive personal data is any data which, if misused or disclosed to people who do not need to have access to that data, would lead to harm or discrimination on an individual. So this includes religious beliefs or sexual orientation. So if, for instance, if you're following what is happening globally, and now since Trump is in government, you will notice that Trump the other day issued an executive order against transgender, and you can think about what such executive orders can bring into place. For example, right now, please mute. Thank you.
Kind reminder to all of us to mute our mics during this session. Thanks.
Thank you, Abigail. So I was speaking about the Trump executive order on anti-transgender. So for this particular situation, you can think about what would be the ramifications. So for example, anyone who identifies as LGBTQIA could now face a lot of discrimination, and we could even see an increase in the number of hate crimes. Then we have biometric data. So biometric data, I categorize it into two. So we have the physiological characteristics that you hold as a human being that are unique to you. So we have facial recognition, we have fingerprints, we have your facial structure, we have your iris, we have your DNA, and then we have behavioral. So this one specifically speaks to how you as an individual would behave. For example, how do you walk? What is your gait? How do you type? How do you move your mouse? And all this information, when combined and maybe used to train an AI system, for example, without your consent, then what could be the ramifications of this to yourself, given that biometric data is data that cannot really be altered. It's very unique to you and it's very individual. You can move to the next slide. Yeah, so biometric data, like I mentioned, is very unique. So it makes it very sensitive because as an individual, no one has the same fingerprint geometry that you have. No one has the same earlobe like you. No one has a similar facial structure with you. Maybe your cheekbones are higher than somebody else in as much as you could look alike. We also have instances where biometric data is used for security purposes. So for those of us who have smartphones, maybe you use your face to access your smartphone, or maybe you use your fingerprint, or if you're getting into a building, maybe at work, you also log in using your biometrics. And also in some instances, it has been used to improve user experience. For example, in some airports right now, you don't need to go through the desk. You can just scan your your passport, and you can easily get in. It can also just look at your facial structure and create a profile, and they can tell this is so and so. Then we have workforce management. So at our workplaces, when we are getting in, we'll probably be required to sign in using our fingerprints. So this is where this will apply, and also in law enforcement. So for example, if today you needed to get a police clearance certificate, at least say for Kenya, you will need to go to DCI, have your fingerprints taken, and then in a few weeks you'll get your police clearance certificate. And if you don't get it, of course, in some places, for instance, if you're looking for a job, if it does not come up as a clean, if you don't have a clean record, then it means you will probably not get employed. So let's look at some legal frameworks and how they're defining sensitive personal data as well as biometric data. So in this section, we'll be looking at the global perspectives as well as regional perspectives. So we'll sample a few nations and have a discussion on it. So we'll start with Europe, where we have the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation, which is the law governing data protection within EU. So this law addresses sensitive personal data and biometric data under Article 14 and Article 9. So from this regulation, it generally prohibits the processing of sensitive personal data, including biometrics, unless you have met certain conditions, which are maybe consent, or it is necessary for you to fulfill an employment contract, a social security obligation, or it is necessary to protect the vital interests of an individual. Also, a thing to note is, in as much as, yes, there's the GDPR, different countries within the EU would have specific regulations on specific sectors. For example, in Germany, their General Data Protection Act speaks on employee privacy. So it provides a additional lawful basis whenever you want to handle or you want to process employee data. So for example, you can only process employee data where you're doing this for purposes of recruitment, or you're doing this because you want to carry background checks. And also for this, you need to obtain consent from that particular employee before you're able to proceed. And then we can go to the US. So the USA does not have a federal law on data protection. So different states have their own law, or they're in the process of coming up with one. So for this particular instance, we'll just be looking at two that I feel would be very relevant to us. So we'll be looking at the California Privacy Rights Act, which closely mirrors what the GDPR provisions on handling biometric and sensitive personal data are. And one of the things it also does additionally from the GDPR, it prohibits you from disclosing or selling an individual's personal information. And an individual has a right to write to you and direct you not to use their personal data, not to use their sensitive personal data or their biometric data for any particular purpose. You can also not sell or disclose this to any other individual. Then we have the Illinois Biometric Information Act, also known as BIPA. So this is specific to biometric data within the state of Illinois. So for this particular regulation, what I found to be very interesting is the provision on entities sharing their data retention policy and being very specific on how long they'll be storing your biometric or your sensitive personal data. It also requires you to obtain consent before you collect biometric data, and you can also not sell or disclose biometric data without the consent of the individual. Then we can go to Brazil. So the Brazilian data protection law has a similar provision to the general data protection regulation. So in terms of how you'd handle sensitive personal data under the GDPR, for instance, what are your lawful bases? Have you conducted a DPIA? What are the ramifications, or what is the impact of you processing this data on an individual? You under Brazilian law, you also need to consider these same scenarios. Then we have China, which is the Personal Information Protection Law. So it has its definition of sensitive personal data, like I mentioned, is deep, because it also speaks about if the biometric or sensitive personal data is leaked or it is illegally used, then it can also harm the dignity of an individual. And for privacy, when you're looking at privacy and data protection, you're not just looking at the right to privacy, you also need to consider other rights of an individual, such as their right to dignity and freedom of expression, like someone had mentioned in the earlier session. Then it requires you to obtain a separate consent for the processing of sensitive personal data. Then it also requires you to have a detailed notice of which describes your necessity to process that data, as well as the impact of your processing to an individual. So this must be disclosed before you process the individual's personal data. And then back here in Kenya, we have the Data Protection Act, which doesn't really define sensitive personal data, but it gives a list of what it would constitute. So it has biometric data, property details, spousal and children's details, race, social and ethnic beliefs. And just like the GDPR, it prohibits the processing of personal data unless certain conditions are met, such as consent, having an appropriate lawful basis, and also respecting the principles under the Data Protection Act. It also requires organizations to conduct a data protection impact assessment whenever they're processing sensitive personal data. And if you're going to be transferring this data outside Kenya, then you're required to also obtain the consent of the individual before such a transfer occurs. We have Nigeria, which has similar provisions to the Kenyan Data Protection Act, except it has an additional list. So it also covers criminal records and trade union membership. And the conditions for processing this type of data are just similar to the Kenyan Data Protection Act as well as the GDPR. Within the region, I found South Africa's appear to be a little bit more structured in terms of providing guidance on how you need to process sensitive personal data, as well as how you need to process biometric data. So it has different sections on processing sensitive personal data. So within POPIA, if you want to process biometric data, you must ensure that you meet all the conditions of processing personal data. So that includes consent, lawful basis, as mentioned before. But you also need to ensure that if you're doing this, you're either within a law enforcement agency or you have a lawful authority under any law to conduct such processing, or maybe you have a warrant. And if you're an employer, you should do this in accordance with labor laws. So for you to process sensitive personal data, like I mentioned, you need to have an appropriate lawful basis. But each jurisdiction has more detail on how to process this data and additional information on the lawful basis. What I found to be applicable almost across board is issues such as consent. So if you're going to be using consent as your lawful basis for processing personal data, then you must ensure that it meets the required threshold of consent. So it must be explicit, it must be written, and it must be verifiable. So if it is written, then it could be verifiable, but it has to also be tied back to the specific individual. So you can't give consent on behalf of another person, of course, unless they're a minor or they're a person with an incapacity. Then the other lawful basis is a legal obligation. So for instance, if you're processing this data for purposes of employment or health, or because there's a safety law that requires you to process this data, then you can use that as your lawful basis. The other thing is necessity. So necessity would apply in different scenarios. For this particular case, you could process this data because you want to protect the vital interest of an individual, which would mostly apply in medical emergencies. So for instance, if you want to, say, transfer my biometric data from Kenya to the UK, and maybe I've passed out, I'm unwell, and or I'm unable to maybe give my consent, then you can use vital interest as your lawful basis. There's also a necessity for reasons of substantial public interest. This, in my opinion, would mostly apply to government agencies. For instance, during COVID-19, where there's a lot of sharing of data between government and the private sector and other governments outside Kenya or any other country. And then there's also where the information has deliberately been made public by the data subject. For this particular requirement, I find it to be a bit problematic, because then this would mean that you're giving leeway to organizations to scrap people's data and use it without their consent because they have made it public. So we'll be looking at best practices for processing biometric data, but this will be a tiered approach. So we'll first start with what are the risks to processing biometric data. Then we look at what you can do for you to properly process biometric data. So some of the risks to processing biometric data, the first one is surveillance. So think about facial recognition technologies. So for example, is that the Taliban ISIS instance? What happened in this particular instance is when Taliban took over their territory in 2021, they found that the US security agencies had put in place a certain technology that would help them identify who was an ally during that particular time. So this particular technology, it's called HIDE. So this particular technology, when it was taken over by Taliban, they used it to trace everyone that was helping the US government, and they were taken out. Then we have covert and passive collections. So this happens when biometric data is collected either directly from you without knowing. So for example, on your phone, you download an app and it asks you to give certain permissions and you do so, but you don't really understand what they'll be using your data for. Or when an app just automatically collects your personal data without you knowing that they're doing that, or they just collect all the public data that you have about you and they create a database with all that information about you. And we look at a case later on how this was determined. So we have also manipulation and improper use of data. So there's a lot of emerging technologies that are coming up, I think I could say almost every day. So a key concern is the rise of deepfakes and their potential to spread misinformation, disinformation campaigns, and smear campaigns. For example, there's a documentary that was done, I think it was in the UK, about a child called
Sorry, Winnie, perhaps we may need to repeat that from the example. I don't know if you can hear us. We've lost you a bit. Or Winnie, if you can hear me, we've lost you a bit.
our faces, our voices. We're using.
Winnie,
Hello?
sorry to interrupt you. We lost you a bit there. Perhaps you can just pick up from the example, the beginning of the example.
Oh, sorry. So the example is was on a child called Ella. So it's a fictional child called Ella who was speaking to her parents in the future, and she was telling them about the dangers of posting your child's photos online, as well as their voices. You know, there's this phenomena called kidfluencers. So you're posting everything about your child, their voice, and everything they say. So if this information is taken and
I don't know, perhaps maybe it's just me, but Winnie, I've lost you again. Is everybody else having the same issue?
She seems to be having some technical problems.
Yeah, Winnie, perhaps if you can check your.
I think there's a network issue.
Yeah. Winnie, can you hear us? Winnie, if you're still speaking, perhaps you can check your. We've lost you a bit again.
Hello?
Hi, Winnie, we've lost you again. Perhaps you can check your network. Losing you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, my network is a bit problematic.
Okay.
So speaking about discrimination. So for instance, if if an AI system has been trained using data that is non-representative, then the consequences on the individuals affected would be dire. I think Amaka had mentioned the Amazon instance. I'll mention the works of Dr. Joy Bulamini. If you have time, you can read her book on unmasking AI, where she discusses different issues to deal different issues on the ramifications of unregulated AI technology. So she mentions that when she was trying to come up with her research project, she calls it Aspire Mirror. So she was trying to see if the software she was creating could recognize people. So when she was testing this particular software, it could not detect her skin color, and it could not detect her skin color because she's dark. But when she drew, I'll call it a cartoon on her hand, and she put it on that particular software, it could recognize her hand and the cartoon as a person. So she also had a mask that she had taken for a certain Halloween event. So when she wore it, the system could also be able to say that the particular mask was a person. So for her argument is that whenever organizations are coming up with such kind of technologies, they need to be aware of the unique characteristics or social, economic, and cultural backgrounds of individuals to make sure that their data is very representative of everyone, so that we are able to do away with the issues of bias. Yeah, we can move to the next slide, Abigail. So how should you handle biometric data? So the first thing to mention is handle it according to the specific regulation that applies to you, depending on the country that you are. So if you're required, for instance, to obtain authorization before you will maybe transfer that data outside the country, then ensure you receive the same from your specific regulator. But here are some guiding questions that you can think about when you're processing this type of data. So the first thing is, what are you trying to achieve? So for example, if you're processing that data, say for recruitment purposes, or you're processing my facial structure to allow me to have access to maybe a certain facility, will processing that data help you achieve that particular goal that you want to achieve? And can you be able to achieve that particular goal without processing my biometric data? The other thing to do is to ensure that you're very transparent with your data subjects, that you'll be processing their biometric or their sensitive personal data, and also inform them of the risks to such kind of processing. Then if you're going to be processing personal data, for example, you collected it because you want to give me access to a building, maybe because I'm your employee, but after some time, you feel like you can use this information to surveil me, to find out when do I get into work, when do I leave, when I'm at the office, which other offices do I visit, how long do I stay there. Then you need to ask yourself if this is an additional purpose, to which first you need to notify the individual, and two, you need to obtain consent from them. Then you must also consider the laws that govern your specific processing activity. So for example, if the law requires you to, say, register with the Data Protection Authority before you carry out any processing, then you must do that. If it requires you to conduct a data protection impact assessment, ensure that this is done as soon as possible. For instance, if it's in Kenya, you need to do this at least 60 days before you begin your processing. Then always ensure that you're only collecting the data that is necessary to fulfill your particular purpose. Then if you're going to be using a vendor or a third party, always do a vendor risk assessment prior to you onboarding that vendor to do this particular service for you. Then look at the security measures that you have in place or you will implement. For example, do you need to have in place encryption? Do you need to have access control matrices? Who will have access to this data? For how long and why are they having access? So the rule of thumb is always use role-based access control. So that, and always do user recertification. So maybe if someone moves departments and they no longer need to have access to this data, then ensure that their access is revoked as soon as possible. Then also consider how long you will retain this data for. So remember, we said that this data is very unique to individuals. So the consequences are very dire because once this data is exposed to the world, you can never take it back. So if you, for instance, if you're using it to access a facility or using it to access your phone and this information is out there and it is scraped, then of course you'll have issues with the security of your devices or the security of your particular organization. Then you also need to look at the ethical concerns when you're collecting this data. So for this one, you need to look at the different cultural and social dynamics as well as the regulatory environment surrounding your processing of this particular type of data. For example, if you are aware of WorldCoin, one of the issues or one of the concerns was when they were processing this data, they were giving individuals some money. In as much as it was in form of crypto, it was seen as a way to induce people to give you their consent, yet they're not aware of what you'll be doing with their personal data. Then you also need to remember data subject rights and think about how you'll enable this particular right. So do you have a procedure in place? How will you be able to detect when someone makes a request on their rights? If they want to have access to this information, are you able to pull this information and give them access? If they want the information deleted, are you going to be able to do that? And any of the rights that they have. So for case studies, we have the UK ICO enforcement notice against Clearview AI. So Clearview AI had a database, I don't know if it's still there. So they had a database that contained images of people that had been scraped from the public internet, and individuals were not aware that this data had been scrapped from the internet or it was in this particular database. So if you wanted to search for, maybe you saw a photo of someone and you wanted to search and find out more about them, and you put that particular photo in the database, it would create for you a URL and it could reveal certain information about the individual, maybe their identity, where they're located, how is their movement and their behavior. And in as much as this only had access to law enforcement agencies, the ICO mentioned that the fact that individuals did not know that their information was being collected and used in that particular database, it was unlawful, it was not fair to those individuals. So they were asked to delete all the personal data of all UK residents, and they were only given 6 months to do that. They were also asked to refrain from any further processing of that particular data, including any web scraping. And in the event that they wanted to go back to the use of such this technology, then they needed to do a DPIA and share the same with ICO for their review before they could be allowed to continue processing that particular data. So yes, there's WorldCoin, which I have already mentioned. So some areas of non-compliance with WorldCoin included unlawful processing of personal and sensitive personal data, which was in contravention of the Data Protection Act, as well as a cease and desist order that they had been given by ODPC. For WorldCoin, the other thing to note is this took this got a lot of public attention. So it was even discussed. A whole committee was formed to discuss this particular issue, and the activities of WorldCoin were halted until they were able to comply with this, the provisions of the Data Protection Act. They also failed to conduct a data protection impact assessment, and because they were also transferring data, that data from Kenya, I think, to the US, they failed to provide proof of appropriate transfer mechanisms for that particular type of data. So they were ordered to stop processing data, and their instruments, the orb, I think it's called the orb, was confiscated as part of the investigations by the Data Protection Commissioner. So for emerging trends in the use of biometric data, we have convergence, where biometric health and genetic data are now used together in technologies such as IoT and wearable devices. And this information is used to track how an individual is faring in terms of their health. So it tracks your sleep patterns, your heartbeat, and for some people, they're given these devices, or they are asked to have these devices as part of their patient healthcare. We also have advanced authentication systems. For this one, I found it to be very interesting, and from experience, where you're required, when you download certain apps, you're required to do a liveness check. So instead of every other security or authentication measure that they could use, the liveness check is the one that they chose to use. Maybe it makes sense because it's one time. It happens every single time, so you don't have to maybe remember your password or remember your patterns. Then we have adoption or access to deepfakes, which I had mentioned. Then we have biometric surveillance technologies like the China's social credit system that uses an individual's facial recognition data to determine if they're a trustworthy citizen. We also have integration of biometric data into digital ID systems by governments. Apart from India, Kenya has also been on the limelight for this particular issue, where we had Huduma Number, which was a digital ID initiative by the government, where they wanted to merge individuals' personal information, including DNA and biometric data, into one particular system, but they failed to do a data protection impact assessment. And one of the recommendations was for them to do a data protection impact assessment. Whether this was done, we're still not sure, but a few months later, we had Maisha Number. I've also seen this being replicated in Tanzania with their Taifa Number. So I think as we continue to progress, as these technologies continue to be created and to be adopted, we're going to be seeing quite a number of these issues growing up. So what are my key takeaways for you? What risk management strategies can you have in place? The first thing is to ensure you strengthen your compliance with privacy laws. So look at your consents. Can you verify that you achieved, that your consent was obtained lawfully, that the individual was actually aware that their data was going to be processed for a particular purpose? Do you have a record of processing activities, which is just a data flow that shows how the data flows within your organization, say from the moment it comes in to the dates archived or it's destroyed? Have you done your data protection impact assessments to just look at the risk to an individual? And have you put in place proper mitigation measures? And also, have you submitted the same to the Data Protection Authority if this is a requirement that you must comply with, and you have proper privacy notices. The other thing is to ensure that you implement robust security measures. So do your security audits, your vulnerability assessments, encrypt your data, both in transit and at rest, ensure you have proper access controls, and make sure that this is reviewed on a regular basis. You can decide to do this quarterly, biannually, yearly. That is really up to your organizational procedures. The other thing is to embed privacy by design and default. So ensure that privacy is integrated throughout the life cycle of your systems, the biometric systems that you're implementing. Also monitor how your third parties are complying with the provisions of the Data Protection Act and how you have guided them whenever they're processing biometric or sensitive personal data. Also ensure that you have a proper data breach response plan, because each data protection law has a notification requirement. So if you're required to notify your regulator within 72 hours, at least ensure that this is well documented in the procedure and you do that notification to the regulator. If you're required to make a notification to the data subject, also ensure that this is done as soon as possible. If you're going to transfer this data across borders, ensure that it is in compliance with your specific Data Protection Act. So if it requires you to obtain individuals' consent before you transfer, then ensure that the same is done. Also do your transfer impact assessments. For instance, if your law requires you to only transfer that data to a country that offers an equal level of protection to individuals, then ensure that when you're transferring that data, that is in place. If not, you have other additional measures in place. For instance, you've entered into data sharing agreements with those organizations in that other country where you're transferring this data to. And also just stay updated on technological advancements and any new threats that keep cropping up in the industry. That's
okay. It. Thank you so much, Winnie, for that presentation. That was lovely to listen to you. We have a few minutes, probably a minute just to get to the close of it. So if you'll allow, I can have you answer a question that's just come into the chat. The question is, how are global security companies regulated insofar as the transitional operations in the provision of such services give the AI amoeboid imperative that might not fully enable rights to be forgotten, where sensitive, where sensitive on this in the system. I think let me read that again.
Yeah.
Are you okay?
I didn't get that. Sorry.
The question is, how are global security companies regulated insofar as the transitional operations in the provision of such services? I'm thinking the services regarding the biometric regarding the provision of such services, given the AI amoeboid imperative that perhaps imperative that might not fully enable the right to be forgotten where sensitive on the system. Advocate Nosifo, if you're live, perhaps you can elaborate on your question. That would be great. But I think the question is more so on government regulation, how global security companies are regulated insofar as transnational operations given the services with regard to biometric data.
For tech organizations, it's a bit of a dicey situation, is what I'd say, because first of all, most of them are not based locally. So the reach of the Data Protection Authority might not really be sufficient. If we had, for instance, maybe a global data protection law, then that would have been helpful. What I have seen happening are proposals, for instance, in Kenya, just the other day, there was a proposal for this the companies to have physical locations in Kenya. This maybe would make it easier for enforcement of these regulations. And yeah, that's pretty much what I'd say.
Okay. I think we can take one more question before we close. There's an example that you give that an employer should let their employees know if biometric data is used to access the workplace. Explain how this then would infringe on data privacy laws. This is talking about employers letting the employees know if biometric data is used to access the workplace platforms and it is used for monitoring purposes.
And so the thing with data protection, like Amaka had mentioned, is allowing individuals to have control over their data. And also in the event that you want to check this, suppose maybe an employee stole something, or you are investigating that employee and you never disclosed that you're using their data for surveillance or for tracking, then of course you'll be found by the court or the Data Protection Authority to be non-compliant with the data protection regulations. For instance, the lawfulness basis, fairness, yeah, all those principles. And we've seen different cases in Kenya touching on the same. We've seen organizations like APSA finding themselves in trouble because of getting into an employee's WhatsApp and doing investigations. Yeah, so it's important to just be transparent from the get-go so that someone knows this is happening to my data, and if I'm caught, then this would be the consequences.
Thank you so much. I think those are the questions we can take for now. I again want to thank you so much, Winnie, for that presentation. The compliments are coming in. Thank you for that insightful presentation. I also want to again thank you, Hari and Amaka, for their previous presentation. Thank you again to the organizers of this masterclasses, Solomon and your team. I also want to thank all the participants for staying on till the last session. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow for the final day. And thank you again. I hope you've learned a lot. Again, reminders that you will get the slides as well. They'll be posted in the website, as well as the YouTube channel, which will also have the recording of this sessions, of the 3 sessions we've had. Thank you once again. If there's no other, I think we can close there. Okay, but thank you again once again for the lovely session we've had, and I look forward to seeing you all again.
Thank you very much, Abigail, for your wonderful facilitation. And have a good night, everyone.
Have a good night, everyone. Thank you as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Well done.